Welcome to the panel on film criticism and gender. We're very happy to have you here, and I'm very happy to share the panel with these six amazing film critics. Before we start, we would like to each introduce ourselves, and we'd like to ask Helena to start.
Hello everyone, it's really great to be here with you guys and with you. My name is Elena. I work for the Proto newspaper and also for the Thessaloniki International Film Festival. It wasn't my first choice to become a film critic. I started out as a mechanical engineer. And thankfully I changed my mind. What I wanted to say is that I will be talking here from a place of privilege, because I was lucky enough to study the thing I wanted to study. But then as soon as I came to Greece after finishing my studies, I was lucky enough to get a job as a film critic and for a film festival. And throughout the 16 years that I've been doing this, I've never been unemployed. And everyone, more or less, has been paying me. So I just wanted to make a note that this is not the norm here for Greece.
Καλησπέρα. Hello everyone, my name is Λίγα, and I should also thank the Outview Festival for hosting us and for organizing this, and Maria Cyber and her team. I've been working as a film critic for many years. I'm currently working for two media. One is the website critics.gr, which we started in 2011. We're co-owners of the website together with Ollie here, and two guys, Yabus and Manolis. We did a 50-50 in 2011. We're doing well. And the other medium I work for is the national daily newspaper, Ημέρες. I'm very proud that I was chosen in that team because the whole art section comprised only of women, and it was a woman, a very respected colleague of mine, which I love very much, who chose me to be the film critic of the newspaper. And that's also important because in Greece, another great asset we have as film critics is the Solaris grid of Aprilίου magazine, which is here, which hosts only newspapers, not websites, though. So being chosen to be a female film critic for that newspaper was what put me there, which has been good for me professionally. That's all for now.
Hi everyone, I'm Polly Kurgu. As Leila said, I'm the co-owner and film critic for Flix.gr. I also work for Nova TV, but concerning film criticism, I do it at Flix. We all started from Cinema Magazine back in the days. I'm very proud to be in this discussion because I feel that a lot of things we consider to be common knowledge when they are not. And I'm looking forward to have a discussion, a shared discussion with my esteemed colleagues from Europe and the audience.
I have been a film critic for many years, as Lida said. We all started at Cinema Magazine, now we are the co-owners of Flix. I also work for TV, and I'm very happy to talk to you tonight about things that we all think that are common knowledge. But I think that we have to reprogram ourselves in the way that we're thinking, because maybe we have been taught something is wrong.
Kalispera, I'm Maja Bogojevic from Montenegro. I'm a film critic. I've been a film critic for many years. I've written for various media in Montenegro, not dedicated to film, but just general media like daily press. And then in 2010, I decided to found a film magazine, and it's the first film magazine in Montenegro called Camera Lucida. I did it with my students because I'm also a professor of film theory and film and media studies. My PhD thesis is title and the book that resulted from it. The title is Cinematic Gaze, Gender and Nation in Yugoslav Cinema, so this is really my topic. And I think 2 hours is not enough to talk about this. It's most of my colleagues.
We're gonna drink later.
But, and I hope So, and I would like also to say that I'm also proud to be here and Evcharisto for the festival to organize such a panel for this with this important topic.
Hi, I'm Wendy Ide. I'm based in the UK. I've been a film critic for numerous publications, starting out Dazed and Confused magazine, then the Sunday Herald, which is a Scottish newspaper, the Times, and now I'm at the Observer and I'm a trade critic for Screen International. And that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you for cutting that short. I was like, what am I going to say? Hi, my name is Beatrice. I am from Berlin, Germany. I am the editor-in-chief of Kinozeit, which is a large online magazine mainly for art house and independent film. What else? I'm a film lecturer at Freie Universität Berlin, and I write for a whole bunch of other outlets, mostly in German. And because you started with the background and the perspective, I come from a slightly weird background of being East German and brought up in a socialist environment and then transitioning to West German environment. I'm a queer person, which I think in terms of this festival is also really interesting and important because I represent female critics and queer critics, so do some of my colleagues. Yeah, and I think that's about it. Your turn.
I'm Thomas. I'm also from Berlin. I grew up in a small village in Bavaria, low middle class, I would say. I was the first to go to a higher school and later studied film in Berlin. My MA is on John Waters and his star system. So yeah, I'm gay, obviously, and
Not so.
And so represent that aspect of this panel. I've been working as a freelance film critic for many years as well. Not really in the beginning voluntarily, just because of the media situation. There were just no jobs in newspapers and magazines, so I had to do freelance if I wanted to have that. Yeah, I've been doing that for many years. I also worked for the European Film Academy and for the Jewish Film Festival. Also because of economic reasons, because it's not really doable anymore, I guess, like in other countries as well, to survive as a pure film critic. Yeah, and I think I give over to Polly for...
To start from somewhere.
Yes, please.
Okay. How many of you are sick and tired of the Me Too questions and the Me Too subjects and discussions? You are. I'm not, because I think that we haven't had enough yet, but I understand where you're coming from. For the last couple of years, as the Me Too and the Time's Up movement gained popularity, issues of gender politics and gender perception, even professionally or personally or socially, have been reevaluated as well. Do we live in a man's world, in every aspect of our lives, even in the movies? How is cinema treating women? In front of the camera, behind the camera? How is cinema looking at women on the big screen as heroines or across from it as viewers or film critics? How do movies perceive female heroines? How do filmmakers and studios and distribution companies apprehend and size up female status? Is it too confusing that you're hearing both? Okay. Last but not least, how much does the cinematic world respect, make space, and take notice of film criticism when the critic is a woman? And does that matter? Let's see. AFI, the American Film Institute, has issued its highly respected list, you probably know that, of the 100 greatest American films of all time. Going through it, you might notice, or you might not even notice it, which makes it even more interesting and even more serious, that there is not one film directed by a woman. Not one of the 100 best American films of all time. Do you consider that a coincidence?
It's no coincidence, nor it is surprising. Who is evaluating? Who is voting for these lists? White, male critics. New studies released in 2018, the one that Maria has published in the press release of this panel, thumbs down 2018, which was conducted by the Center of the Study of Women in Television and Film at San Diego State University. Another one that I found, which is called Critics' Choice, and it's a gender and race of film reviewers across 100 films of 2017, found that gender divide in film criticism has a tangible impact on the overall exposure and evaluation of female-led films and films with women directors. Let's talk simply. We do this job because we know that we influence people. We're influencers. Media influence people. In many ways, we are gatekeepers. Our job is to literally shape the critical consensus. We advertise a film or we bury it. We create a buzz or we don't. We give it space in our columns or we leave it out. We evaluate it with 5 stars or 0. We include it or omit it from our list of the unmissable films of this year. For too long, women have been excluded from this conversation. Having a predominantly male sensibility when evaluating, promoting or voting for films, we end up with an all-male definition of what is the greatest movie of all times. The character of gender, as socially constructed, does matter. It's only one variable. Race matters. Social class matters. Sexual orientation matters. And you know that, we're here. Who gets to define what's art and what's not, what is worthy of our time and what is not? Impacts. First of all, box office returns. How many people are going to see the movie in a world where 8 or 10 films come out every week? Or now we have like this streaming content available at all times, so viewers have more choices to make, and therefore might be more likely to need guidance of what is worthy of their time. Second, what makes it to the Oscars? Is it a coincidence that no female filmmakers are in the 5 slots for Best Director every year, and we're talking about it? Is it a coincidence that the Academy wanted to shape up a little bit their base, and now we have more African American films included because they changed, they included more members? Third, how can you get funding for your next project and continue working? But for me, the most important, socially, is that critics build our collective conscience of a movie, our collective taste in cinema. Greatest irony, through the years, even we, women spectators, have subconsciously learned how to regard a movie as serious or not serious enough, worthy or not worthy enough, according to this value system that has become our point of reference. Is it maybe too girly? Is it a chick flick? It's not the best movie, but it has its place. A male critic wrote about Wonder Woman. Therefore, the Time's Up movement got the first step right, hiring more women in positions of power and in front and behind the camera makes a difference, but it doesn't solve the problem if the people reviewing the movies aren't as diverse. Meryl Streep said, "How in the hell are we going to change getting women's stories out there or women behind the camera if the people telling the buyers, the consumers, what is good are all guys?" And I think that it's interesting to look at the numbers.
Yeah, maybe just the main numbers of these 2 studies. It's interesting that we basically found only studies in the US, but none in Europe.
I found something in UK and Australia. I didn't find France or Germany or something.
Yeah. There is UK research, but it's not just about criticism, it's about female participation across the industry. But I mean, I think what we are talking about here is a broader picture. It's not just criticism, it's across the board. It's about the whole industry.
And the 2 studies that Polly mentioned, the Critics' Choice, they actually did it from 2015 to 2017, and they looked at the 300 top films and generated a sample of 59,751 reviews. And in that period, 2015 to 17, of these almost 60,000 reviews, 78.7% were written by men and 21.3% written by women. So the gender ratio is 3.7 to 1. And the second study that you mentioned was actually from spring 2018. So it might be interesting when we discuss the change that might have happened, because in that study they found out that male critics were 68%, so still an awful number, but a lot lower, and 32 female critics. The interesting thing is that they didn't only compare the number of critics, but also the number of reviews. And reviews written by male were 71%, so they're not even more, but they write more. And reviews written by female critics were 29%. I think that's just to get an idea. I think it's enough for drawing numbers. I don't know who wants to join in.
Since we're talking about numbers, we don't have a study here in Greece. We quickly checked with a colleague from a distribution company, and out of the 237 accredited film journalists or journalists in general who are allowed to participate in the press screenings, 85 are women. 83. It's not clear who is a film critic or not. So if we were to isolate the film critics, the number would drop to like 11, 12. But since we're in an era of the internet and blogging, it's without a proper research, we are not allowed to speak by numbers only. But Polly wanted to ask you a question.
I was wondering before Lida, because Lida kind of pointed it out, how many years the grid of Athinorama had no woman at all? The grid is, Athinorama is the most popular weekly guide. Most of you are Greeks and you know about it. And usually, and Athinorama is here, and we love it and we read it. But it is, and actually, gives me the example to say this is not a hostile discussion. It's a discussion because I think that sometimes people are not sexist, and they don't mean bad. And we of course started talking about all this stuff the last couple of years more vividly. It's just the way that the system worked. We all have been brought up in that system, and we're just thinking that it's a great opportunity of conversation to kind of change it, or at least ask the questions, So how many women are in the Athinorama grid right now? 2. 5 years ago?
What? No. 5 years ago, no. You were? Yes. One.
Maybe. And how many female reviewers do you know in general?
Great. Well, now you know us. So.
Don't forget us.
So I think this is our input regarding numbers.
Yes, of course.
I just want to say something surprising and paradoxical, actually. The numbers, I think this is the only situation where the numbers work in favor of women in Montenegro, but then I come from a country where numbers are really so small. The whole of Montenegro can fit into a street in London, It's such a small country, so we don't have such big numbers in anything, like some criticism. So basically we have 3 film critics. I'm talking about film critics who write on a regular basis. There's one man, who's a really great, my colleague and a great friend of mine, and we have a young woman and me. So there are actually 2 women and 1 man. So I just wanted to say this is the only situation where numbers are in favor of I'm talking about those who write on a regular basis.
Yes.
Of course, there are other professional writers or philosophers, people who occasionally write on film, and that's a different issue. That's all I just wanted to say. So I
should I just discuss anything that comes to mind? Since we're talking about Greece, I'd like to bring it home a little bit, so then we can maybe talk about other countries and since we are in Greece and we live and work in Greece, I wanted to pinpoint, although we all know very well, that since Greece is part of, let's say, Southern Europe or Eastern Europe or the Balkans or the Mediterranean, whatever you choose, these are all traditionally patriarchal societies and cultures, and we grew up in this culture. I mean, our generation, which is also the parents of the next generation. So this has been very heavily engraved in our mind, and it's still going strong. Just as an example, I'd like to read a little piece written by a colleague, just also to give you an idea of what's popular. Maybe you have read it yourselves. I just quickly translated it in English. It's written by a colleague, a male film critic, who is, I think, the most well-known film critic in Greece, who's called Dimitris Danikas. He writes in the most popular daily newspaper in Greece, Protothema, not daily, but weekly. And he wrote a piece about a year ago when the declarations about Harvey Weinstein were published in the New York Times. So he wrote a very big article. I'm just going to read a small part of it. So it reads, I won't tire you, I'll just read a little bit. He writes, when I read the revelations about sexual harassment or rape or attempted rape of big names of the female star system of Hollywood, the Philico star system of Hollywood, by that cursed sex maniac, Harvey Weinstein, the first thing that came to my mind was, but why now? The second and self-evident was, that can't be true. There's something wrong with this picture. And the third was, they obviously want to do away with him. Exaggerations, conspiracy theories, but no, I just learned that after the scandals published in the New York Times, the Weinstein Company, having thanked him for his excellent original ideas and his invaluable services, sent him packing and shut the door behind him. So Weinstein was forced to go. In fear of many more upcoming episodes of the series The Hollywood Rapist, he's forced to apologize in front of hordes of hungry journalists who would happily see him burn in hell. What could the poor guy do? In front of him, there's more. In front of him, all the rape victims, in quotation marks. Behind him, FBI agents, 20 years in jail. And then he gives several examples of the victims, of the women who came forward with stories. And he says, let's take Angelina Jolie, a totally quiet girl. So this is ironic, you understand. No relation at all with three ways. Completely faithful, totally committed, totally given to each of her partners. Don't make me open my mouth. Enough with the Hollywood virgins, in quotation marks. So 20 years ago, while shooting Playing by Heart, the alleged rapist led her to a hotel room. I was a child, I felt terrified. The child was 23 and she had already slept with her brother. They were obviously playing hide and seek. The child had been cutting herself. The child had already done it all. Everything. That's her own right. But now, 20 years later, oh yes, I shouldn't forget, again, the victim managed to break free from the wild sexual appetites of this maniac. Mercy, Angelina. And then the article finishes saying, Dear Harvey, as you well know, in many westerns, in those fucking small towns, the fucking are all written in English for some reason. In those fucking small towns of the Wild West, the sheriff ends up being hanged. The difference in your case is that your executioners were actually benefited by you, the fucking bitches. So long. So this, I mean, you don't have to search a lot for it, it's online, you can check it out. 16th of October 2017. So this article was published by a very established figure in our work environment, in a very popular newspaper. And what I'm trying to say is this. I believe that in our culture, the Southern culture, whatever you want to call it, I would say conservative culture, because we have one, I think that people lately, in the last decade also, since the discussion has become louder, I think more people are making an effort. And I think that things are starting to change. But making an effort means that there's some force put into it. It's not, it doesn't really come from inside you. You're making an effort, you're trying, don't believe it. So when you read things like that in a very wide range, very established publication by somebody who everyone knows, people feel relieved, you see. They feel relieved because they understand that what they're feeling inside is something that's well accepted in their environment, which is precisely why I feel, and that's why I read this, that it's most important to have as much diversity in the written form, in every form, as we can. And apparently, being a woman is part of this diversity. So.
Personally, I come and say, holy shit.
Yeah.
Real. I mean, that blows my mind. I kind of assume
The most prominent Greek
Okay.
film critic.
that's incredible. I think, that at least is out there in the open, that's out and out sexism. I think what's also interesting, and there was a really, really good piece written by Kate Hardy, who's an actress. She was in Mona Lisa. She was very successful early on, but like many actresses, reached her 40s and pretty much got ridden out of the industry, and that I suppose is something else that we probably should comment on as female critics, because we don't really see ourselves represented. Representations of women are not really representative of the world we live in. Anyway, Kate Hardy had something to say. Obviously, she was condemning the acts of Harvey Weinstein, and she was saying, yes, but there are a lot of male filmmakers who are coming forward and saying, yes, this is wrong, but they are still showing violence against women. And I think there's an interesting thing to be a parallel to be drawn between the violence that we saw that he was perpetrating against women and the violence that we see within the art form. She was saying that without people like Weinstein, without acknowledging what the violence that he perpetrates, then maybe we wouldn't have quite so much violence against women in cinema. Now, I don't know, I think it's an interesting parallel to draw, but it's not all, what I'm saying is it's not all of it sexism. There is a kind of, it's an unconscious sexism as well, which is recognized.
The system of
In patriarchy, it's very free. Sorry, that helps, yeah.
I mean, if we're at the subject, maybe we can go back one step before we open up the entire social system, and maybe talk about like what we experience in our job, which also has something to do with that. Because I feel I love film, so I'm going to the cinema in a press screening. I watch this film. I know I'm going to review it. I have my entire process of watching this, and I'm watching my colleagues watching this, my male colleagues. I hear what they're saying. That's the first layer. Then I go home. I have my own thoughts on that. I write them down from a certain perspective. That by now, because I've become so fed up, I am actually pushing a feminist agenda. So I got radicalized by my colleagues, I guess, and life and everything. Because not a lot of people in Germany are like actually portraying that and really pursuing it. So like I'm starting to push, and a couple of other critics are doing this as well. And then I have the process of it having, it's going to the editing process. So I think we should talk about the help or not help of female or male editors working with our pieces. And then it goes online. My favorite part, where you have a comment section underneath, and I think we should talk about the comments too. And you and I did that shortly, and you were talking about an interesting death threat you got, and then I realized that I don't get death threats. I only get threats for anal sex for some reason. This might be a very German thing, though. I think I've had like 10 or 11 offers to help me recalibrate my brain via anal penetration. So because I'm obviously talking bullshit about a film. So maybe we can start with that and like build up. You go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just that actually we're now in the essence of the problem, right? We're discussing, but I wanted to start with an anecdote that's not relaxing, it's depressing, but that's when you're in the Balkans. I mean, in the patriarchy of the Balkans, everything seems to be depressing. But some years ago, I was catching a plane from Belgrade, and it was still that time when you were asked by a policeman, you know, where, why, how, and where you're going. I mean, what's the reason of your travel? So I was asked, and I said the truth. I'm going to a film festival. And he said, "Oh, you're an actress." That was I said no. So what are you? I said, I'm a critic. A woman, a critic? Oh my God. Okay, that was his reaction. Actually, this phrase, a woman, female critic.
How many years ago?
Look, it was still this century. I don't know. It wasn't the last century. No. It was in this, maybe at the beginning of this century, so it's quite a while ago, but this century, right? So it's not that far back, you know. But this phrase embodies this patriarchal fear of women, you know, the whole thing, woman and a critic. I mean, two things that are so threatening, you know, to the traditional male norm, right? So. What I wanted to say after this depressing anecdote is that film is very complex. It's not only art, it's also a complex medium. And that's why when we talk about criticism and film criticism and gender gap, it's very important to sort of get a wider scope or perspective about films. And I think all of us have mentioned that. It's about the film text we are watching. It's not, I mean, we cannot expect gender equality in film criticism if we have on-screen violence, if we have on-screen gender discrimination, etc. It's not just about what film transmits, film images transmit, it's about what they evoke as well. That's very important. And that's the power of filmic medium. It's very powerful, and I think if that's why I think these talks are very important, because if the change, I'm talking about the gender change, if it starts in film sector, it might transmit to other, not only artistic, but social realities. And it's, when we talk about film criticism and film texts, the text that we see on film, you know, that we have to, and I think Beatrice has mentioned, I'm also a feminist, and I'm very feminist in my writing when I write about films. And I don't hide I'm a feminist. I mean, you can't really be a good writer, I think, on film if you're not inspired by feminist theory, film theory. I think both for men and women is very important. But I think it's across the whole filmic sector, it's important to do the whole change, not just in writing on films, but in film juries, film selectors, film commissions, all the decision-making film bodies, who decides which films get selected, which films get seen at festivals. And I think Thomas is nodding. I think all of us have had some sort of festival experience also, not just as a festival critic, but also helping some festivals in selection, etc. So there is this whole issue of change, and I think once we make those structural changes across the film sector, various sections, then it can be reflected in film criticism. I hope I'm not being too radical, but I'm just being...
Actually, you know what's really radical is actually if we think about the language we use, maybe we should be tearing that up. I mean, you know, a masterpiece, a maestro, a masterwork.
Masterful.
You know, masterful. It's all very gendered. And, you know, can we not maybe sort of embrace a new vernacular for film criticism? And I remember right when I started out, I was told by an older male critic that I was too emotional. You know, and that's such a gender thing. Yeah, so, you know, you're too much of a woman in the way you approach film criticism. He's actually subsequently gone back on that and said, well, you know, maybe I was a bit wrong about the whole dispassionate, you know, no emotional stuff. He now realises that his criticism is really boring, and you know, it's much more interesting to engage on an emotional level with the film.
Of course.
But yeah, there's a whole sort of, and I think, you know, we do embrace, we are conditioned as much as anyone else to use those terms and to, you know, embrace the idea of the great untouchable auteur, which is, I guess, a conversation that we can also have, because there's no such thing as an untouchable auteur. Anyway, I do feel that that's a radical thing. We're going to actually change the language we use, but it would not be a bad thing to do.
There is Sue Thornham that actually has a feminist film theorist book called Passionate Detachments. Passionate detachment, so you're not dispassionate, but you as a film critic passionately detached, you know.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, that's also the strong woman. If I have to read, oh, she's such a strong woman. One more time, I'm going to kill someone because strongly, because I mean, it's like, oh, surprise, she's strong for a woman. You know, and all she's doing is like living her life in this movie and like getting her shit done. And it's like, we do this every day. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but we actually survive without you. Even in real life. And this is one of the things. And I, like, coming back to our process, I realized that when I watch, like I'm at Cannes or like some big festival and I'm watching a film by a woman, I am anxious. I sit there and I'm like, please don't fuck this up. You're the only one in the competition. And then, you know, and then I realized, what kind of bullshit? Like, why is she, just because she's a woman and the only one in the competition, not allowed to completely fuck it up like every other guy does? And I realized then writing about these films, I have a bias in me too. I am much harsher with a female director than I am with a male director. Maybe I'm like, this is like reversed sexism. Maybe I think like, it's a great film for a guy. He really tried. It's not bad, you know, considering that he's just male and. But you see, this is something that comes up a lot for me right now. That I obviously don't have the same things that I'm attaching to those kind of films, and I'm also like, I really want them to do well, and I'm so much more disappointed if they're not. And this is something I'm realizing in my process right now, because I think like every single film by a female filmmaker, every single film by an African American filmmaker, every single film by somebody of a minority that happened to make it somehow into one of those festivals needs to be fucking dope, because otherwise we won't see them next year. And that's just really, really sad.
Can I say something about this? I had a small point to make about exactly that, because I catch myself being very harsh with the women, just because I'm thinking that we're going to be using the F word a lot, like feminism, film, female, fuck. That the F word is going to go around. Don't fuck it up, because you're going to take all the other women with you down. And I was sitting with a friend at Berlinale this year, and we saw the Austrian film. I don't remember the name right now. And I was like, oh, it was a lost opportunity, and why did she go this way, and why did she, and she could make, and my goalie goes, relax. You know, we're allowed to fail. Women in competition, women directors are allowed to fail. We have seen so many mediocre films in film festivals made by men. Men made films. Like, women are allowed to fail as well.
However, it's true that if women fail, they're much quicker kicked out of the system. I mean, there is truth to that. We need to acknowledge that. Our anxiety has a basis. You know, if there's certain American auteur guys who keep making one mediocre or shitty film after another, and they still get an opportunity, and they get another opportunity, and another opportunity, and they're well funded, and that's not what's happening with women or other minorities.
And we can see it recently how Louis C.K. was given very quickly a second chance. If it were a woman, she would have been dismissed, like, in an instant. I want to get up.
If it was a woman, though, she probably wouldn't have been doing what he was doing in the first place.
That's true. I've been actually called quite nice for a film critic.
I love this because
the B word.
I frequently get feedback that I'm a cold bitch.
The B word. But that was
how dare I be so
together with your being strong, you know.
Damn it. But there's certain people that don't understand that I would actually have an opinion in the first place. That happens sometimes with colleagues. It has happened with editors as well. which is not cool. It usually happens in the commentary section because we know the internet is kind of there. But it's definitely, I feel there is a bias in when you see that a woman has written a film critical text. It is read in a very different way.
People have, men have guts if they are writing their opinion. We are just bitches. If you allow me to share a story or my kind of place of where I'm at this moment, I have plenty of sad and infuriating stories as well, although not so many online comments because I work in the same newspaper as this guy, so he gets all the attention. And of course I've suffered discrimination from employers, colleagues, whether they're male or female, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Family and friends. But something happened a few days ago, and I want to use it here as an example. As we were researching about what the numbers are in Greece and so on, we approached a colleague of ours that works in a distribution company, and when we asked her, can you send us the list of accredited critics, she laughed. And she said, what do you need the list for? I can tell you right now, it's like the 6 of you. We're quite a bit more, but still, the first reaction was laughter, and I was wondering, why does she laugh? I didn't ask something funny. And it reminded me, have you noticed how people who have suffered loss in their lives might smile or laugh when they're talking about their loved ones? For example, so-and-so really suffered and then died in agonizing pain, and they have to laugh after that sentence because they need to make it better. So what happens is that you kind of predetermine that the reaction is going to create something awkward, the atmosphere is going to be awkward, and you need to deflect from it, you need to tone it down. It rarely works, by the way. Let's put an asterisk here because I want to get back to this. My main concern lately has to do with how we talk about things that create awkwardness. And discrimination and sexism create awkwardness. And not amongst ourselves. I'm not talking about how we talk about feminism among friends, among people who agree with us. I'll give you an example. I was at a dinner table a few weeks ago, and there was a conversation about the role of women in society. I was disagreeing with everything that was being said. I was appalled at what was being said. And at first I was quiet because I didn't know them. Then I became vocal, and then I was attacked. So I realized I had to change my strategy because then I was being affirmative. I was making big statements about how things are, blah, blah, blah. So I thought maybe a question might help. So I turned around to the guy who was sitting next to me, the one, by the way, who said I was nice, although I'm a film critic. And I asked him, do you want to tell me, honestly right now, that you believe that your daughter will have the same number of opportunities as her brothers? And he turns around and says, yeah, she's the one giving orders at home. So I kind of was taken aback, and I lost the battle. This translates to writing about film for me, because most of the people who read our articles are not the ones who agree with us. Even my mother, who's my most loyal reader, doesn't always agree with me. So I've tried being ironic, never helps. I've tried being loud, angry, symbolic, subtle, funny. Funny is easy on the eyes and ears, but it's deflecting and creates confusion. And people will still go and see a Greek film like Bachelor. Bachelor is like
The Hangover.
The Hangover, but it's the most sexist, racist, homophobic version of Hangover you might ever imagine. It has 3 sequels, and all 3 of them are box office hits. So no matter what we write, people are still gonna go and see those films. They will pay money for them. So I kind of feel that I've hit a dead end in a way. I'm not sure what's working. I don't know how to talk about discrimination in film anymore. So I've started thinking that maybe I have to try another way, in the sense that it might be more effective than laughing about how sexist Clint Eastwood was in his latest film, The Mule. I don't know if you've seen it. And that way might be asking questions, perhaps better questions than the one I asked that man. I even thought of creating a forum called Whatever Works, where we can exchange, experiences and make a list. I love lists. Make a list of questions that have been effective or not. I'm finishing up here. There was this documentary, Half the Picture, that came out last year. And there was a quote by Carolyn Lombardi who said that we shape how America looks at itself. So if women are only a small fraction, then you only get a partial mirror back. So she was referring to filmmakers, but our role as film critics is to hold that mirror back too, I think. And asking questions is perhaps a way, but honestly, I'm open to suggestions. Whatever works, to get the message through, however awkward it is.
I've got no answers to that. But what I would say is, what I would ask you is, the films that you mentioned that have box office success, even though they're shit, are they reviewed positively anywhere? Or is it just, you review them negatively and they get positive reviews from other quarters?
I think most reviews were bad.
So some films are critic-proof.
Yes.
And I don't think, I don't think anyone's going to support them ideologically or culturally or artistically. They're just shit, but people will go and see shit. And in cases like that, I always think critics are a bit like dogs barking at a freight train or something. The commercial, the advertising power, or the commercial power of the film will take over. But I still think that we are incredibly important as critics in terms of positioning them within culture and appraising them. Plus, also, there's certain things I think we have kind of these things like unconscious biases that we need to pick up on. For example, we have assumptions about what a person is because of their gender, because of their race, and I think the more we have people of women or people of colour or people of other sexual orientations writing about cinema, the more we can be aware of the unconscious biases that we have sort of taken on board. And they're not something that, they're not deliberate, unconscious obviously, they're something that's been taken on by society. But the culture that we consume is part of the reason that we have those unconscious biases. So I think our role as critics is to try and unpick that a little bit. It's not an easy thing to do, but the more voices that we have, the more weight that we have trying to unpick the kind of assumptions that we have. That's all I can say on that, I guess.
Did you want to?
No, go ahead.
Maybe a better example would be that if you want to write about a movie with a female protagonist, like a very social, down-to-earth, well-written, made by a female director, would a guy who dates you come with you? Like, could you write a review that would convince another guy to go and watch the film? Maybe the bad reviewed films that are very commercial, yeah, they're destined to have their audience, but how can you write a review for a female-oriented, with a female-oriented subject matter, if that exists, I don't know, we're open to discussion here, made by a female director, having a female lead, and having men being intrigued and interested and wanted to, to watch it and being exposed to it. That's, for me, it's even a more like everyday life example. It's something that you see in a film festival and it's kind of under the radar, but you think that's a wonderful film. I think that's a tricky point. I don't know. I think that, and I love when the conversation is not very hostile. I said it before because I feel the need to communicate so much. I saw like a tweet, and I laughed so much. It was a woman saying, "Do you know what's sexy? Really try to understand me." And I laughed because, yeah, that's sexy.
trying to understand me and you know, find out where I'm coming from. So I think that we have all our biases. We are brought up in certain environments. Lida pointed out that we are coming from Mediterranean, patriarchal, conservative families and societies. But it's so wonderful to open a discussion in things with questions like, wow, you know, maybe we have been told something's wrong. It's not bad. It's not a bad thing. Let's just start reworking towards that direction and kind of like have a different ABCD right now, like a different alphabet, a different language while talking or while writing or while communicating.
Yes. Well, as you said, there is misogyny and there is high patriarchy of the Balkans, and I can share that with you. It's very similar. And a lot of things and points here were brought up and said and suggested about the influence of film critic, whether male or female, especially female critic, if she is a feminist or even a man who is a feminist. I mean, again, inspired by the feminist film theory, which is quite semiotic actually. So that sort of falls into the category of educating, you know, audiences, educating. To be honest, we can all ask a question today, especially young people, who reads anything today? True. Who reads anything? I mean, let alone who reads longer, sort of long reads. And I work in Camera Lucida. It's something that I call slow journalism. You know, so we have really long texts, and you need like days. They're like a chapter of a book, you know, because we're not funded by any cultural institutions in Montenegro. So it's my freelance, you know, sort of voluntary work, you know. I'm not even funded by that. But so we talk about education, influencing with our language, with our way of writing, but we also forget the uneducating, to uneducate, you know, the undoing.
The reprogramming.
And you said about being, you know, how many of us are biased, how many of us, even feminists, you know, unconsciously appropriating some things that we were brought up with, the film text that we saw. And one of you, I think you mentioned also about the list of votes in the States. I'm actually, and I have to thank them, I'm regularly participating in the BBC poll, you know, as I think for a while the only woman from the Balkans, you know, in their poll. And I see my list, and you know what? 2/3 are male filmmakers, you know. And this is when I also participated at a panel when I talked about this with other feminists who are filmmakers, not just film critics. We are influenced by Clint Eastwood, you know, and Fellini's, and Godard's, and René's, and Fassbinder's, you know, during our growing up. And these are still the films we love. It doesn't, do you know what I mean? And it's actually promoting the female filmmaker. It's even hard for us because a lot of them also, we shouldn't forget, do not like to be promoted only as female authors. They want to be authors first. Good filmmakers, you know. They don't want to take the credit for just being women. So basically, how do we undo and educate this identification process that we grew up with? You know, when you watch the film and you identify with the protagonist. And I won't talk much longer. I'm a professor, so I really tend to sort of start lecturing or something. But there is this article that I read, a text by a woman filmmaker called Christina Callas. Maybe she's Greek origin, I don't know. She wrote a text, yes. Well, yeah, you know. She wrote an incredible text in English, and she is proposing new ways of filmmaking, not only for women, but for men also, like new ways of filmmaking that would be some kind of poetic solution. You know, the ancient Greek drama was very important for us. Why? Because it was emotionally educating us. It was giving us emotional education. But Aristotle, when he was writing, he wasn't talking only about entertainment and about digressions and diversions. He was also talking about bringing awareness. And she's, you know, drawing on that, on the sort of, you know, sources and the scholars of the Greek drama. And she thinks that new filmmaking should actually propose avoidance of any identification, male or female. You know, when we talk about male gaze and female gaze, no, a third gaze, look, you know. So there should be a third gaze and a new poetic solution in film text which is changing the storytelling by non-linear narrative, so a new, completely broken narrative, and multi-protagonists, many protagonists, so not only one. And therefore, the person watching the film would not identify only with the male hero or, process with the female heroine, So it's a very interesting text, really, and it's a very interesting. I agree with many things she proposes. However, how do we get there? How,
If I can answer,
Sorry.
because I really do think it's very interesting, but again, don't you feel that it does sound very interesting? I'm interested, I'm going to check it out and read, because I don't know
I'll send
about
you.
it.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'll send you the link.
but it's again another strategy, is it not?
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to make sense of a gender-free response to the stimuli. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
As you said before about female directors or female creators or artists or whatever wanting to put their gender identity second.
Yes.
And so do we.
Gender neutralization.
Exactly.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So do we as professionals. I feel like a female film critic when I'm put into a corner and asked about it. I don't think about it every day. I filter the films I see and what I see around me in my life through my perspective, which of course is female, because of course there is a difference. And so that's what I feel that the first effort we'll have to make is try to break through the identities, not create more strategies.
Yeah, it could be didactic, of course, if you sort of tell people what to do, but
I want to add something to that. From a queer perspective, there is something called queer reading of films, which has been done by any queer person for the last 100 years since the film existed, because we did not exist in the film.
Yeah.
We were not represented. This is something women do as well. I think any kind of minority does that. There's a huge, wonderful conversation starting now of Latin people, African American people, people with Asian backgrounds watching American cinema where they're also not represented. And it's basically the thing that if you watch a film and you're not in the film, nobody in the film is remotely like you, but you will find things in the film and you will make it something that you can attach yourself with. Of course, it would be better if you were actually represented, but people are able to do this. And my new approach is queer reading for straight people and for men. I am trying to very slowly, without them realizing, putting in my text, giving them a tiny education of how could I possibly queer read or like female read or whatever you want to call it, a film, so I can kind of understand a different perspective better, which works with questions as well, and just because they're represented all the time, they don't need to make this effort. But if they do, they actually learn something. And they also learn something about themselves, because I think a lot of, especially men, don't understand that feminism is not against men. We're trying to be equals, and men also have a lot of problems because we are not equals. And I don't know if that's gonna work, but I'm sure this is my new approach right now. So maybe that would be a thing. And the second thing I'm doing in terms of solution is we are talking about education and criticizing. I'm also curating. Because there's not a lot of room, we all know that, but if it's possible, if I see films that are underrepresented, that are small, don't have big budgets, they're not the big thing, the mainstream stuff that's gonna be covered anyways, I am making a deliberate point of trying to give them a critique, putting them, out there so people can see it and are aware that it's there, because there's so much content and so many films right now, especially with Netflix and all this other stuff. I realize that people are desperate for curation because they want to watch a film in the evening, and you know how it is. You're on Netflix and you just keep looking and looking and looking, because the Netflix thing is not made for it. They don't want you to watch a film. They just want you to pay your monthly fee. So they're not helping you in any kind of way to actually find stuff. They have a huge back catalog with amazing stuff you will never know about.
There's so much trash.
And so much trash. And somebody needs to wiggle themselves through that. So this is something that we I feel like a lot of film critics are starting now too. They're starting to curate. And if you do that in a deliberate attempt, just like this film festival does, giving a space for all these films, I think this is something where we can change very slowly. We can change perceptions as well. And I think that might be the most fruitful way, and also for us to keep our jobs. Because I think that's where things are, more and more going into this direction. Because as you said, who's still reading? The longer text, the like really critical. We're talking about the gaze and film analysis and theory. I'm just, come on.
Who has patience?
Exactly, but the curation thing, I think that's where we can actually do something.
Oh, please.
We keep the right to speak.
We've been talking about film criticism from a perspective of where we can actually talk and write, but there is a way to get there, and I would like to talk about the relationship between editors and critics and writers. And I remember when I started, I was always openly gay in the business, and many editors from newspapers would automatically give me the gay films to review. And then it developed, and I also got like art house films and stuff, but I'm never asked to write about a war film or about a superhero movie or something like that. And I was wondering how it was, or how it is for you, and also because we are on this panel, we are freelancers, but we are also editors, or some of you are editors, and you found, for example, Flix. I'm also curious about that point of view. I mean, do you think about who you give a job or a film to review to? And I mean, are there? I mean, stereotypes can also be positive. I mean, just yeah. So I'm really interested in your experiences in that department.
You wanted something before?
No, it's fine. Let's follow on now. Yeah.
Let me. Yeah, I'm both. I'm an editor and I write. When I started writing, my favorite films are genre films. Horror, sci-fi, fantasy. No fun to write about this as a woman. Oh my fucking god. What was it? I forgot the name. Paranormal Activity. I don't know if you remember that wonderful film about domestic abuse and a guy who just can't take no for an answer, because basically that's what he's doing. His girlfriend's like, leave the ghost alone. Please just, don't bother him. And he's like, no, the ghost and I will have like a penis contest. And then, who dies in the end? You get it. So I wrote about this, like how just even from a storytelling perspective, this is just so stupid and lazy, because that's basically like every second heterosexual relationship right there, just more boring. And whoa, the comments, I'm telling you, we're back with the anal sex again. The comments were horrible, and I realized like women, like female film critics in genre, like nah. Nobody wants to hear from me, apparently, when it's a male film, a guy's film. It's, the Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel are slowly changing that. God forbid I write about Star Wars. No. I can, because I don't understand, and anything fanboy is really, really bad. So as an editor, I'm now making a deliberate attempt of fucking them over and giving like, here's Star Wars young female film critic, go out there and try yourself. Be careful, but do it. And
don't read the comments.
Don't read the comments. I'm taking care of the comments. We're actually taking care of the comments, because that's also something. Some outlets will just ignore the comments and leave you in the rain as a writer when people are like threatening you and saying the worst of things. I don't do that. We don't do that. I have a responsibility as an editor with the comment section as well, and I'm just not going to do that. And I'm trying to do this, but I also really go there, and they prefer to have like the romantic comedies and all this nice stuff where they feel comfortable. And I think this is also something that we need to kind of work with and see that we can get other people out of their comfort zone and push them to do other stuff.
No, I agree. Actually, something I found interesting, I firmly believe that everybody has a right to have an opinion on any film. One thing I have noticed amongst some of the female critics who are quite sort of vocal about these things is this idea of you should stay in your lane, and they're not interested in any male opinion on any film which is directed by a woman or has a female protagonist. Now, I don't think that's fair, because I think we should all be able to write about whatever, and all our opinions should be valid, and that means that we should take on the male opinion as well. And so this whole sort of idea of staying in your lane, I feel, it worries me a little bit, because what you're trying to do, give the commissions to the people who wouldn't necessarily be expected, is great. I think we all should have the freedom of this, basically. So.
And just one more thing, the bias thing, you always get the gay films.
And not anymore.
Not anymore. I never got the gay films. I wanted the gay films. But people immediately, and without asking me, read me as a cis heterosexual woman, which I'm absolutely not. So it wouldn't even come to their mind that I'd be interested in a gay film until I openly solicit, here, me, lesbian, give me the lesbian film. It's like that's the other way around. And I think this is with editors too. Not only oh, you're a female, go do the girly movie, but also with many other things. And I've seen this with colleagues who come from a background, a migration background, who are people of color. They get moonlight, and that happens all the time. And I think this is also something we need to do against the grain as editors.
Because I think that we need to you are the man at the table. First of all, I just realized that we're sitting in front of a wedding dress. Thank you. All of our photos are going to be in front of a wedding dress.
That's very appropriate, really. Irony couldn't be greater.
I know. We're predestined, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to say something in the form of a question, because it would be perfect to open the discussion with the audience as well. We're trying to talk about solutions now. No, you don't? We tried to talk about solutions, I think, in the last 10 minutes. How can we change the language? How can we communicate better with our readers, with our friends, with our boyfriends, with our girlfriends, whatever. Girlfriends. How can we do it in a way that we can stop the stereotypes or change the way that we communicate? And how sick and tired are you? Because I'm very tired, and I'm I get very emotional when you hear the block of political correctness. For example, whenever you're trying to change the conversation, you hear, oh, now we're going to become so politically correct that, we will have to have 5 women in the competition at Cannes. Nobody wants to do it that way. Nobody wants to do it with a law. Nobody wants to do it with ruling of some kind. Nobody wants to change abruptly. No, man, you can enjoy your films, so relax. I'm not going to take the joy away from you. But at the same time, what have we done all these years without being politically correct? I think that political correctness is the way of shaming me when I'm trying to say that the conversation was not right for me for many, many, many years. And at this point, if somebody has a better solution of how we can change things, sometimes it's going to be in anger. These conversations are going to be, getting very emotional and angry. We don't have the tools as women, because we have thought that this is very normal, to write in another way or talk to another way, because we have been accustomed to this. And maybe we are very, we're wrong in the way that we approach things, but at the same time, don't throw political correctness in my face. We need to change the dialogue. That's my...
Can I? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm never short, but of course you're tired. Of course we're all tired. I mean, patriarchy plus capitalism, it makes you really tired. It brings you down. I mean, it's everything you said. I feel the same. I'm tired. So we need a systemic change in the change of the system. It's gender and class are very interconnected. And one more thing I wanted to ask before has any of you here or on the panel seen the French film made by the French woman, a short film called La majorité opprimée, the oppressed majority?
No.
You must. I mean, this is one. It's been a few years, I think. Pour rien. Anyway, I'll send you the link. It's about 20 minutes long. What she does, and you ask the question, we all ask the question, what should be done, really, without strategies, you know, without generalizing strategies. What she does in 20 minutes, she assigns men all the female, you know, stereotypical roles. So it's a male actor, it's a male guy, you know, who is trying to hide from the women who are trying to rape him in the streets of Paris and things like that, you know, housework. So she actually completely subverts all the, you know, gender stereotypes, and it's a very clever, it's a really fun, and it's an amazing film. It's very powerful, you know, it's 20 minutes. So, majorité opprimée in French, the oppressed majority, in English. The title itself is ironic. Sorry.
Oh yeah. What I wanted to add is, yes, regarding what Thomas said in the beginning about how we've been treated in our profession. Well, I've been quite lucky because I started out in Cinema Magazine, a magazine which was very hospitable to all. Really, it was a great experience.
True.
That was luck. In our website, the way we choose the people who are going to write about films is basically the people who like the film most, because our aim is for films to do well in general. So that's our criterion. And in the newspaper I work for, I told you that it's an all-female team, and it's true that this gives me great trust, and it's very productive, so it does make a difference. But I really want to emphasize what Beatrice said about curating, because I think this is one of the most important things we said here today. In the sense that, for example, I heard from somebody, because I don't listen to that show, there's a sports show by two sports journalists, Panuchos Karpetopoulos. They were very impressed because I had a positive review about the film Creed 2, the sequel of Rocky, because I liked it, so it was positive. So it sort of intrigued them, and now they're reading my column, and I'm absolutely curating what they read. I mean, I have them in mind all the time, and I'm promoting all the films that I want, and they actually do talk about them. So what I want to say about this is also that when I was growing up, I think there were virtually no female film critics at all. I'm sorry if I'm mistaken. I don't remember. Rosita Sol. Yes, it's true. So we have a responsibility on the next generation. I mean, I've been working for a long time. I feel quite confident. I'm not going to lose my job tomorrow, I hope. And not for something like that anyway. But we do have a responsibility on how the future female film critics form their identity. Mm-hmm. And this is what I think is very important. Do you want to say something? Yes.
I was not openly gay when I started working, but my colleague was. So I had not the issue you had, because he was getting all the good films. But I was left with all the B stuff, you know. Not just romance, but anything he didn't care about. That created, though, a freedom. So nobody was really checking what I was writing after a point, because they didn't really care about those films. So it gave me, plus with the support of Tassos, the colleague, because he was really helping me to find my own voice, blah, blah, blah. It created a sense of freedom that I could write stuff, because I had the illusion that nobody was reading them. And after he left, they kind of let me do the same thing in terms of editing. Okay, of course they would mess with the titles and I would get really furious. Or they would even sometimes add stuff that were not mine. But still, you know, and moving on to the website, I found a sense of freedom that was never there. Unless I'm writing about Game of Thrones. And then you have the comments, not like anal sex, I haven't reached that level yet, but, you know, in terms of my you know, being aware of stuff.
So this happens generally in journalism, though. And I was reading, very quickly, I was reading a study because I was trying to find a European study similar to what we're talking about. And Oxford University made a study called Gender and Journalism by Linda Steiner in February 2017. And historically, women were firstly incorporated in the media to provide a woman's touch. And even today, 37.2% of journalists are women, only 37%. But the most interesting thing is when they're doing political news or when they're in the newsroom. They were never given the meaty stuff. They're given health, religion, education, I don't know, diet, family. I think they have it worse than us. We at least are in the arts, and I was watching the Pauline Kael documentary recently, and she said, you know, women in the arts were always welcomed in the beginning because we are creative and our nature is to be creative. But film critics, wow, now you have a mind, and you're judging me, and I'm male, and I'm a male director, and you're judging me, and that kind of changed the conversation, because then, you know, you can be creative, you can be in the arts, you can write a play, you can, you know, do some stuff, but film criticism?
You're the subject, you're not the object anymore. You know, so
yes, let's, please.
So, I mean, we're film critics and we love to write and talk and talk and talk. So we can go on forever, but maybe we should kind of...
First of all, do you have any idea about critics in theatre? We have a lot of women, even in Greece. So, is the problem that films are very expensive? In the United States, the first industry is the cinematography audiovisual sector. When you have money involved, women are always out. It's normal. So the only thing we can do is education. Starting to educate our children that there is no women's film or men films. There are films. Because also, I am gay, but I am against ghetto. So I don't need to have women films. I need to have films. Artistic, good films. So the problem is very complex. It is not so simple. I think we must do something about education and try, of course, all the 50-50, Me Too, Time's Up, etc. Of course we need it. And of course, feminism is not only to be a woman, it's a lot of other things.
I think you're right about that. An interesting thing about film criticism is when film first started out, it wasn't really taken very seriously, and so the very first film critics were largely female. And then when it became a serious financial an industry, then the men took over.
No, excuse me. You know the picture with when Kennedy was assassinated? You have a picture in a plane with Johnson, servant, Jackie next to him. Behind him there is a man. The name of this is Jack Valenti. He was the president of the Motion Picture of America in '63. He created 2 laws. He obliged televisions to give, I think, 30% of their budget to produce films. And he obliged them to project the films by laws. And now, in Europe, we cannot protect our cultural products. You know, there is a big fight between World Trade Market and Europe because we have film centers and other organizations who helped the cultural products. So these men create what it is now, the industry I talked to you before. Now this is more than the cars. The industry of audiovisual in the United States is more important than the cars. And not only that, they export the American dream to all around the world. Because with all these films that they oblige the other television, in Europe we have television without frontiers. That means that every country of Europe has a percentage of production of his country, of Europe. But what they do, the Americans, is a television in Europe, a channel wants a film, oblige them to take 40 with. You take this film, but you take also another 15. So the product, actually, the percentage of what the television, the channels project is more than the percentage. And that's the way that they export the American dream and the American way of life all over the world. So it's very, very complicated, all the system.
You're talking about Hollywood, but there's also an independent American cinema, which
Of course, hopefully, of course.
Luckily, yeah.
But yeah, but the problem is why we
But
do.
Hollywood is, yeah.
But I understand where you're coming from, but to draw this back to what we're talking about is, of course, this is, I mean, we can only talk about a tiny piece, and we all need to acknowledge that this is not just a simple thing. It's very, very complex.
Of course.
And it's not only about gender identity, sexual orientation, you know, your class background, where you're coming from, if you're a minority, you know, all of this is ingrained into a patriarchal society that is very much ingrained into capitalism. And you know, we are a part of the system, and we also can't get out of the system. We can only find ways, I think, to like all the other feminists before us and all the other women before us for like the past couple of 100 years, to slowly change things bit by bit. Whether it is by repeating yourself until you just, you know, don't want to hear yourself anymore. Whether it's by trying to impose quotas like we're doing right now, or to educate people, or to curate things. I think there's 100 ways. It's just we need to keep pushing. And also we shouldn't, and I think this is where you're coming from too, shouldn't forget the history behind that, which is something that in the film industry has been thoroughly put away, especially now that we're discovering how many amazing women in the silent film area did great stuff, and we don't know that.
Yeah.
Now, they were either forgotten, put away, or men appropriated their films and their inventions. How many women in the beginning were the scriptwriters for the most amazing films until it became an industry and they made a lot of money and they kicked them out. So this is also something we need to rediscover, the film history itself. Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in quotas because I'm a Greek. In Australia, I'm perceived as not being white enough. That's been, and I'm on about that. But what happened in England, and it started with the theatre companies. There was, I can't remember what it was called. It happened about 10 years ago, where the theatre actors all got together and had to really examine their own biases on why they were choosing, why they never chose a Chinese actress to play theatre.
Are you talking about blind casting?
Yeah, I'm talking about colourblind casting.
Colourblind casting,
yeah. And then a decision was made that all those theatre companies, so the directors were all locked in a room somewhere, I think it was in Brighton somewhere, and they had to really examine their own racial biases. And as a result of that, the casting really started to change in the UK. That hasn't happened in Australia. Our Indigenous artists are really leading the way in that, but those of us who kind of fall in that in between, still we have a lot to go. And I think we've got to use those opportunities, because things come in waves, and you go forward and you go backwards, but if you don't run like the bejesus in those moments and take the quotas, like, don't be, like, who cares who's going to get offended or whatever, because you know there's going to be a backlash to that. And can I say an anecdote? It's kind of, I want to say two things. One thing is the Geoffrey Rush and E.J. Morton. I don't know if that means any, but if you think it's just sexism here and patriarchy, the judgment of that is appalling. And if anybody's interested, you can read it online, what the judge said about that actress, who we all know the theatre actor scene in Australia is very small. Absolutely appalling judgment. So this is a worldwide, no, this is rampant, but we voted for marriage equality in Australia, and I, a producer I know who's very well respected, gay, Chinese, wanted to make an ad pro bono for marriage equality, and it was right towards the end of the campaign. And he chose the two brightest young women in his kind of company. One was a Sri Lankan director, and one was a Serbian. So, as we call them back home, WOGs. He chose two young women and gay women to make this ad. Both of them had come out to their families. The Sri Lankan woman, it was very hard. Her mum was not coping with it at all. The Serbian woman welcomed with open arms, not a problem. These two girls, young women, got together and matted out what they wanted the campaign, what they wanted this ad to be. And all the research that was done was that the migrants, the newly found migrants, were the ones who were most resistant to marriage equality. The people fresh off the boat, because these two young women understood that culture, because they come from cultures where that is really, really difficult to come out. So they asked me to play the mother of a young Syrian guy, and he was going to come out doing this ad, so it was a really huge moment for him. And they thought what they were going to do was they wanted to appeal to those people who still hadn't made up their mind whether they would vote yes or no, but out of love for their child or their neighbour, that they were going to vote yes, even though it was against their kind of real maybe values of where to go, but it was a kind of an act of generosity and love to go, okay, I don't feel good about this, but I'm going to vote yes. So the gist of the ad was that the son knocks on he puts a letter under the door, the mother reads the ad, she reads the letter, she rings him up, let's have a cup of tea to come home and discuss it. So that the focus of it was a reconciliation between the mother and the son. Well, the ad was shown to the kind of committee, the Marriage Equality Committee, and which was mostly white, middle class, no wogs in there, women of the kind of 35, and they were all outraged at the ad because they didn't feel like they should have to say sorry to anybody voting yes. And I know it was the end of the campaign, but it was very disappointing for those two young gay women just coming out, that the older, not that much older, gay women were saying, nah, this ad is shit. So this is where, even amongst ourselves sometimes we can't. It's so, I know it's not about, the criticism of that meant that ad was then relegated to some sort of online. They lost confidence and wouldn't. But that ad was appealing to, a different kind of cultural. So it's complex.
Yes, and this is why we need to be intersectional in any kind of way, as film critics, as filmmakers, wherever in the world. I mean, this is not a problem of like certain countries. This is a worldwide phenomenon which we need to, I think, address together and always think about other people. And this is really interesting because when we talked about this panel, we were really very much aware that we're all white. Yeah. For example, that we're all we're all femmes, I guess, and that also the intersectionality of this panel itself is like could have been better. But this is something that I think we as film critics need to work on and do, that we also keep other people who are not us in mind, and also be a voice for them, and also curate for them and try our best to understand them.
And since you mentioned this, let's just note that in Greece, all film reviewers are white. There is no other race representation. So this gives you an idea of how it feels.
Because the melting pot hasn't really started 20 years ago. I mean, socially, the melting pot of our society hasn't really happened until very lately. I think maybe the next generation of us has more ethnicities and cultures, making our
I think it's slightly better in the UK. There's certainly more people of colour who are critics. There are a couple of young trans women who are critics as well. But the big point here, the big but, is all the top critical positions are taken by men, all of them. And the ones who are actually making a living at it are men. I mean, that's true. There are some women just about struggling through, but yes, there is diversity now, and it's great. I'm really happy to see some great young voices coming through, but it's a tough thing to try and make a living at, and particularly if you're just starting out.
I think we're finishing soon, but anyway, I just wanted to quote briefly.
No,
mention your colleagues, a British colleague, film critic writing for The Guardian. The critic's task, male or female, should always be to avoid the question, what is the film about? And he said it's a pun in English that's maybe not very easily translatable, but when he was asked by some people, what is the film about? He answered, about 90 minutes. Sorry, I just said, something to be careful about.
Okay. Hi everyone. I'd like to comment on a couple of things that I've heard you saying a while ago. Actually, I agree with you that curating is like a very interesting perspective in this conversation. And I think that you've mentioned that before in a way, that what we're talking about here is the reprogramming of the human brain. Okay, we've all been brainwashed with the male gaze. Okay, if we accept that there is a male gaze and a female gaze, we've been brainwashed by the male gaze, and I think the only way to overturn that, to change that, is to help more women and more queer people and more gender-neutral people, create films by following the strategies that are emerging, a couple of years now, like the 50-50 by 2020, and we need more of these strategies. I think it's not going to happen if we don't have a strategy, a plan to do that, and I think it's the only answer, and the only way to submerge the stereotypes and the biased opinions, to let people create more films, create more art, to support women. I think it's really interesting. Perhaps you already know the stats. In Greece, for instance, we have in every film school we have a 50-50 percentage of boys and girls studying film. And then, if you look at this generation, like 10 years later, only 5% of these women have managed to make a career in the film industry. Okay, and it's not their fault. I think we all agree on that. So I think we help more people, be it women or queer people or migrants, people from niche cultures, to create their own art, to create their own films, that it will start changing, little by little.
I like very much what you said about strategy. There's actually an Indian feminist theory that I like very much, Chakravarti Spivak, who did mention and wrote about strategies of survival for women, because women are like ventriloquists, speaking, because women have been silenced for so long women of any ethnic background, race or sexual orientation, that they learn. Now they're learning how to speak from their stomachs, from ventriloquism. So anyway, you just inspired me for that. Thank you.
I want to hear the guys.
Yeah,
I really
you
do.
can talk to us.
I really do. Nothing? Zip?
If not, I'm dying to.
Is there anybody else who would like to say something or ask something? Or you just... Oh, yeah, yes. Be brave.
Well, the funny thing is that I have way too many questions, so I'm not sure where to begin. For me, it's a very new thing, the incidents with Harvey Weinstein and everything that followed that, actually, because it's not just that, it was like an avalanche after it. And that kind of looked for Hollywood, at least kind of looked like a shock for the people not on the Hollywood, on Hollywood. For them, it was something like they knew. It was like something like a hush-hush story. Yeah, we know he's a pig and blah blah blah. But what really?
But then came Kevin Spacey. Sorry.
Yeah, but what really kind of made me angry or pissed off, it was the fact that people were acting like, oh my God, these things happen. Which is very weird to see, because you see it every day. You see sexism every day, on the street, on your house, with your friends, with your whatever. It's not something which is a secret. And what pisses me off is this, that people act like sexism is something that's not really happening, it's a secret, you have to talk about it, not many people get affected by it, which is actually completely the opposite. I mean, my sister, my mother, my friends get affected by sexism every day. And the thing with movies is, when I go to see a movie, okay, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I really like when I see movies with made by women, edited by women, or scripted by women. But that's maybe because I consider myself a feminist, so I don't know. But the thing is that in order for you to rack your brain, in order for you to be able to understand something as deep as a movie, because a movie is not just pictures and sound. A movie is supposed to have a beginning, middle, and end, or none of those.
Not in that order, but
or not in that order. And it's supposed to evoke some kind of feeling to you. At least that's how I see it. If I see a movie that does nothing for me, feeling-wise, I get bored. It has to grab me at some point, some way. So, if everything you see all the time is movies by men about how to kill things, or how to explode things, or how to go to space and get back, I guess. And you don't allow, now it's going to sound a bit weird now, the way I'm going to say that, you don't allow a womanly perspective on those things, because it's like women don't like, I don't know, adventure or sci-fi films, which is silly, considering that, for example, NASA had female scientists who did amazing things.
And film has Catherine Bigelow.
Yeah. So for me, something as this is what I'm going to say. For me, something as deep as a movie, as important as a movie, because movies have changed people's lives, literally. I mean, there are people who were gay in the closet, trying to buy everything, and they saw a movie, and that movie is what made them come out. So if that's not strong, I don't know what is. So for me, in order for the industry to go forward and in order to present to people, because I consider movies a gift, in order to allow people to experience the whole thing, you have to have movies from different perspectives. You can't have the same thing all the time, because they repeat the same narrative, nothing moves forward, and you stay on the same thing, which you've seen 1,000 times, and nothing really changes. So I really want to thank all of you for doing what you do, and I really want to ask you to never stop doing it. no matter the threats or the
Oh God, no.
or the unless you want, I'm not gonna force you to. Yeah. So thank you really, really much for what you do and for the panel, of course.
Thank you. Before you all feel all like warm and female, feminist, fuzzy inside, I wanna put this back to you, especially to the men who are sitting here tonight. Part of me wonders why you're here. I would love to know. And the other part wants to ask you, what are you gonna do now? What are you doing? Like, you've just listened to us like talk about this for 2 hours. We all know it's a very complex thing. There's a lot of stuff going on. We're trying really hard. We keep on talking about the same things again and again until we're just tired of it. What are you doing now after you go out of this? How are you becoming part of a solution? How are you becoming an ally? Because I am tired of fighting this alone, and we cannot do that. Like, all of us need to do this together, and that's also part of the intersectionality we talked about. It's also you guys. So now that you've listened to us being wholesomely feminist, I guess, for 2 hours, like, now back to you. What are you gonna do now? Because it's cool that you want us to work forever, but
Hi everyone. I'm Jan from Panorama. It's funny because I wanted to say something about the questions you asked without knowing that you were going to ask this, so I will speak clearly, personally here. The reason I came to this panel is because I admire people that I'm very proud and very happy to call my colleagues, and I'm not even saying that in a flattering way.
We can accept it.
And therefore I was very interested to hear things that would broaden my perspective of things. And before all these Me Too movements and etc., the Harvey Weinstein happened, I already had found myself thinking and reading stuff that I hadn't had before. And when the things broke out, the only thing that I can find positive is that it broadened the sense of visibility, of representation, and how we are thinking film in general. Because I believe this is the most important thing about cinema, the way it reflects ourselves, our societies. And I myself felt like I was seeing things like 4:3, and then suddenly I became a cinemascope, or trying to at least see things more clearly. And but what I'm interested in personally is how we have to be very careful about pop culture, how they choose. At least mainstream cinema chooses to portray not only women but every other person that now has the opportunity to be visible and out there. Because personally, I hate when mainstream cinema portrays women as, like you have said already, as the strong woman. Like a woman that is not allowed to fail, a woman that is not allowed to have a complex psychology, and that she has a predestined role in society and cinema. That's why I try to be an ally, not to be very hasty to have an opinion, try to consider every film I see, whether it's directed by a woman or not, or it has a woman in it or not, try to reflect it as in many ways as possible, and listen more, to be honest. Listen more and try to be patient in my thoughts, and try to be educated myself, not only to educate the others. It's quite easy to say we have to educate everyone else, younger people, I don't know, but we have to educate ourselves most, and that's what at least I'm trying to do in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you. We have amazing men in Greece.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Lida. Thank you, Polly. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it was two very inspiring, great hours, and I hope we can have this again soon with better perspectives.
And go from country to country.
It's a road show.
Maybe traveling.
Stay in the Balkans next time in Montenegro before we have no.
1,000 times I do. Thank you for coming, everybody.